An unlikely pairing were the stars of a BBC One documentary last night. Tommy Robinson was the leader of the English Defence League, or EDL, who have campaigned against what they see as the Islamification of Britain. Tommy meets prominent British Muslim Mo Ansar, who wants the EDL banned. The film ends with Tommy Robinson's shock decision to leave the EDL. And here's a taster of what happened when Tommy met Mo.
In a democracy, when you're angry and you're frustrated, you protest, don't you? You should just vent your frustration in a democracy by using your freedom of assembly, which is what we'll be doing today.
If an Englishman commits a crime, if an Englishman on the march today throws a bottle at the police or commits a crime or gives a Nazi salute you can't...
That won't happen.
Look, you said yourself there are a lot of strange types in the EDL, OK?
Not as many strange types as in Islam.
And if somebody commits a crime today, is it right for us to blame all English people?
Is it right?
It's just a yes or no question.
No,
is it right?
If the people pick up a book and it says throw a bottle at the police officer, when they throw at the bottle at the police officer, of course it is that book's fault.
Do you accept that you are adding to a fear and a hysteria which is causing attacks on Muslims?
No, I don't know.
And Mo Ansar joins us now in the studio. Welcome to the programme.
Hi, Joe.
What do you think persuaded Tommy Robinson to leave the English Defence League?
I hope it was a combination of factors. I think, firstly, spending 18 months with me is probably more than enough to force most people out of most of their occupations. I think spending some time with a diverse range of Muslims, hearing different views. I think going to a mosque was really important. You could have knocked Tommy over with a feather at the end of that journey.
Well, it was interesting. I mean, I watched most of the documentary last night, and, when you were making it, did you change your views of Tommy Robinson and the EDL?
I think Tommy's been quite clear that he hasn't shifted in his views since before or during making the film. I think 2 minutes...
And what about your views of Tommy Robinson?
Well, I did have an impression of Tommy. I thought he was... I had painted him as some kind of Goebbels-esque figure for, the 21st century, and there are elements of them...
He wasn't like that?
No, I think, spending time with somebody always humanises them, and actually I think I found Tommy... There are soft sides to Tommy, although I think his rhetoric has been disturbing, and I think the impact he's had on Muslim communities across the country has been disturbing, and so I think, there are, like many people, Tommy's a complex character.
I mean, the interesting thing about the documentary is that your views were also challenged in the film by other Muslims
Very
who
much
don't
so,
necessarily think you're a good spokesman for moderate Islam. Do you accept that?
Well, I accept that they think that, yeah, absolutely.
But you think they're wrong?
Well, I've spent the last 2 days on Twitter batting back people who share ideologies with Al-Shabaab, the far right, and Muslims who think that my views are not particularly Islamic. I mean, I stand for things like equality. I've been working as a head of diversity for an organisation, and you do things like equal rights and stand up for women's rights and gay rights as well.
Well, and let's sort of take some of those issues, because on Sharia law you were challenged by the head of the counter-extremism think tank Quilliam, Majid Nawaz, on whether you approved of thieves being punished by having their hands chopped off, and you refused to give a definitive answer. Can you give us now?
I do. I think it's absolutely abhorrent.
Fine. Right. Well, that clears that one up. On the subject of slavery in Islam...
Actually, we did have that conversation. It just didn't make it to the final cut.
Right.
So.
Well, that's interesting. Well, that has cleared that up. On the subject of slavery in Islam, you've said in a Twitter exchange with historian Tom Holland, if slaves are treated justly with full rights and no oppression whatsoever, why would anyone object? And you were challenged on this again last night.
Yeah, and today as well. Yeah, Twitter's one of those open forums where people can challenge.
Right, so you stand by that claim that if slaves are treated justly and with full rights, there's nothing wrong with it?
Not in isolation. I mean, if you take that comment in isolation, I would push myself away from that, and I'll tell you why. Tom and I had a 3-day debate about slavery a year ago, and it was about the historical context in ancient times. And I think that was, I hope, quite an academic debate about those things. So this is...
But are you saying that there are some instances where slavery is OK?
No, absolutely not. I find it abhorrent, and I think there should be no slavery. But I think that's kind of an obvious question, I hope.
Right. Well, except you seem to indicate that there might be circumstances when, in the right context...
I think if you're talking about history and you want to analyse something that happened 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 years ago, I think there should be academic freedoms to debate these things.
You mentioned women's rights and gay rights. Tom Holland was in that documentary last night. He said that Islam, and specifically certain historical passages in the Quran, need to be reformed to take into account its setting in modern Britain, with its more liberal attitudes, particularly towards women and gay people. Do you agree with him?
To a certain extent. I think if we're talking about reformation, I think the reformation required is with Muslims, not necessarily Islam. I think there are behaviours, there are habits, there are practices which...
But Muslims are practising the religion of Islam. If you don't change or try and modernise that religious setting, then how are you going to have more liberal attitudes?
I hope you're not telling me that that Christians are the best example and the judge of Christianity.
I'm merely asking about Islam. What do you say in response to that, about this call by Tom Holland to, if you like, modernise or liberalise parts of Islam to take into account the setting here in Britain?
Well, what I say, I mean, I think he's talking about should we have a reformation in Islam as we had in Christianity some centuries ago. There is a great debate going on in Islam about how you relate what's in the Quran and then in the commentaries, which are the Hadith, to modern-day setting. And the idea that there is one single school of thought in Islam is as nonsensical as that there is one single school of thought in Christianity. But one of the things that's come out from what Mo says, although this is my language, is that a lot of the practices in Islam, which some Muslims believe relate right back to the Quran, are in fact cultural. If you take the whole issue of the veil or the position of women, those are cultural or subsequent commentaries on Islam, not in the Holy Quran.
Do you still ask women visiting your surgery to remove the veil?
Well, they know that's my view. I certainly tell them that I would prefer it, and many of them do. I also say to them, I will honour their right to wear the veil, but it makes life a lot easier if I can see their face.
I think Jack and I would agree and probably disagree on many things, but I've been very outspoken about Peter Hollowbone and Sarah Wollaston, and it was reported widely, about their views, which are very much stronger than your views, and they would effectively like to see, my understanding, is some kind of legislation put in place to stop those things.
What about young girls wearing the veil? I mean, Salma Yaqub, who was interviewed also in that documentary, former leader of the Respect Party, says she feels uncomfortable with young Muslim girls of 6 and 7 wearing the veil. Is she right?
Do you know, I understand that. I had a long conversation with my wife about this. No, not necessarily. I'm saying had a long conversation with my wife after the film yesterday. She's from Finland and has a very a European view, as do I think. And my view was, well, actually, each to their own. If parents and kids want to decide to do that, it's not necessarily my cup of tea, but they can do that. My wife felt actually that the headscarf is probably something which is about identity and a maturer thing. So
headscarf, fine, but we're talking.
Talking about the veil in front of the face.
No, I'm not a big fan of that. But do we legislate for these things?
We don't legislate for it, Mo, but I think we should certainly say, as a norm, that it's not a good idea, because it isn't.
Can I just ask about the conversation with the former MP Anne Cry, who said the Muslim community could have done much more to tackle grooming of white girls for sex? I mean, she tried to get leaders in her local mosque to talk to suspects' families, but failed. That's not right, is it?
No, it's not right. It's not right. I mean, one of the discussions we had, and I spent 3 hours talking to the mothers and the families of victims of grooming, and with members of the English Defence League in Darwin, near Blackburn, actually. And part of that conversation was, look, we have a problem in society generally, not just here, but across the world. In the UK, we have something like 200 women who are abused and raped every day, and 50 children.
Sure.
Now, they come from all races and all cultures and communities.
Don't dodge the issue, with great respect.
It's not a dodge. It's not a dodge.
Because there are more whites, Gora, locked up in prisons for sex offences than there are Muslims. But there is a specific problem in the Muslim community, which is to do with the way the Muslim families treat the women and the young men come forward with a view about women, and that can tend to lead to what we've seen with grooming, where groups, and it is predominantly Pakistani heritage men, are grooming young white girls.
But Jack, I think
the community
over the last
hasn't
12
done
months,
enough, just finally.
I think we've seen over the last 12 months particularly, Muslim communities, organisations, individuals be very outspoken
No,
about standing up against
and there's been a
But
big
they
change.
haven't done enough up until now.
Do
you accept?
I think there are complacencies around all sides, and the Muslim community needs to take their fair share of that.
No, Ansar, thank you very much.
Thank you very